Welcome to another recap. In the middle of the night, a millionaire businessman named Phil Parrish suddenly wakes up from his sleep because he hears someone speaking. Someone was saying only one word to him in a very deep voice, and that was yes. Phil tries to sleep by ignoring him, but he hears this voice many times, and his whole night is spent with great difficulty. Now the next morning, outside the house, Phil's elder daughter Allison is shown, who is busy preparing for her father's 65th birthday next week. When Phil comes out of the house, Allison tells him about the preparations for the party. But he was a very busy person, and anyway, today he was worried about the voice of the night. He gives him an answer without hesitation. That's when she can do whatever she likes. After this, his younger daughter Suzanne also comes there and meets him, who is a doctor. Now in a while, two of his business partners, Drew and Quince, come to pick up Phil from the helicopter. Quince is also the husband of his elder daughter Allison. Actually, Phil was the founder and chairman of a news agency called Parrish Communications, and today he had to go for an important meeting with another big news agency called Montague. Because Montague had put forward the offer of combining both companies and making a big company. Phil also thought it was a profitable deal, but he wanted to talk to Montague about this offer face to face. Now the three of them go to the city for a meeting by helicopter, and Phil also takes his younger daughter Suzanne with him, because his hospital was also there. After reaching the city, the three of them leave for the meeting, and Suzanne goes to a coffee shop before going to the hospital. Here a person sits next to her and starts talking to her. He is new in the city. Suzanne is also very interested in his talks, but still she keeps ignoring him. But that person fell in love with Suzanne at first sight, so he keeps talking to her. And finally, when Suzanne laughs at his words, he starts making another coffee for her. On the other hand, Phil is shown, who comes to his office after the meeting. Suddenly, he has a very bad chest pain and he can't even breathe properly. Then he hears the same voice again and again. Someone is saying the same word. Yes, Phil thinks he is going to die, but then his chest pain stops, and now he can't even hear that voice anymore. Here in the coffee shop, Suzanne and that person keep talking to each other with great interest. After a while, when Suzanne starts leaving from there, that person tells her that he has started liking her. Suzanne also started liking him, but so soon she couldn't say it to him openly. Now the two of them walk on different paths, but they haven't even asked each other's names yet. In this way, Suzanne turns to another path, but as soon as she leaves, that person has a terrible collision of two cars, one after the other, which looks like he must have died there. Now in the evening, Phil is sitting in his city house for dinner. That's when the same voice starts echoing in his mind again, which says that he is outside his door at this time. Phil also has his daughter Allison, Quince, and Drew with him, but none of them can hear that voice. So Phil sends his maid to see outside the door. After a while, that maid comes back and tells him that there was indeed a person outside, whom she had left in the library room. Hearing this, Phil immediately goes to the library room to meet that person. But when he doesn't see anyone here, he shouts in anger and says, "Is this a joke?" On this, that voice tells him to scold and stay quiet. And after a while, he says the same word again, yes. Then he asks, what does yes mean? That voice says that yes is the answer to the question that has been going on in his mind for the past week. Phil says that he did not ask any question, so that voice tells him to think carefully and answer. And Phil now thinks a lot and says, is he going to die? Phil says so much that the same person comes out of the back of the closet who had an accident this morning. Now that person comes forward and says yes, he is the angel of death and he has come to take him. This voice was bothering Phil for the past week, and in this week he felt death very close. So he believes in the words of this angel of death in the guise of a human. He understands that his time is now complete, and he gets sad thinking this. But the angel of death tells him that before taking him with him, he wants to stay among humans for a few days and understand their life. And for this, he wants to make him his guide. In return, he makes an offer in front of him that from today on, the more days he will stay among humans, the more time he will get to live. The maid of this beach bill comes to call him for dinner, so the angel of death also tells him to come with him. Phil refuses to do this, but the angel of death says that now he cannot refuse him for anything. Phil also understands that now he will have to do what the angel of death will tell him to do. So he takes him to dinner with his family, where Allison, Drew, and Quince are also present at the moment. At first, he does not understand what to say to all of them. But then he tells them about his friend, and his name is Joe Black. Seeing this unknown friend of Phil, they are all surprised, but when Suzanne returns home in a while, she is most surprised to see him. She tells them that she met him in the coffee shop this morning, but when this Joe Black person sees him like a stranger and does not talk to him, she gets very worried and confused. Now after dinner, Will is alone and asks Joe why he met Suzanne. Joe says that he needed a body to live among humans, and Suzanne must have met the man who has this body this morning. After this, Will shows him his room to sleep and leaves, but after he leaves, Joe goes to the swimming pool in the house, in which the bathing Suzanne comes out to see him. She tells him that he was talking to her a lot in the coffee shop, then what happened to him in a day that he was so rude to her in front of everyone. Hearing this, Joe says that he had no such intention. In fact, his job is that he is not used to living among people and talking to them. But he says that he will learn everything by staying here. Suzanne had fallen in love with him in the first meeting at the coffee shop, so whatever he says, she goes crazy and gets lost in his words. After this, she says goodnight to him and goes to her room to sleep. The next morning, when Will starts going to work, Joe asks him to come with him, and Will takes him around the city on foot and reaches his company's office. When he reaches there, Joe asks him to stay outside because he had an important meeting with the company's board members inside. But Joe goes inside with him, and as soon as he leaves, he starts asking for tea for himself. Drew gets irritated seeing him in the meeting with Phil, so he keeps trying to insult him in every conversation. Now the meeting starts, and Drew starts talking about the same merger deal in which the Bontequique company had offered to bring Phil's company with it. Drew was very much in favor of this offer of Bontequique, and everyone thought that Phil would also be ready for this deal immediately. But he says that since he started this news agency, he has had only one goal since then: to spread the truth to people. He says that by doing this deal with Bontequique, they will get a lot of profit, but most of the control of the company will go into his hands, and then they may not be able to show the truth to people. Saying this, he rejects this offer and leaves the meeting with Joe, leaving all the board members surprised. After the meeting, Phil tells Joe that he wants to be alone for a while. He gives him some money and tells him that why don't he go to the city by then. After this, Joe goes to the hospital to meet Suzanne, and Suzanne is also very happy to see him there. So far, this angel of death has also begun to feel special for Suzanne on the basis of humans, and when he returns home, he asks Phil about his wife, how much he loved her, and how he met her for the first time. Phil gets very emotional while telling him about his wife and says that after his sudden death, he always feels empty. And it seems that now, after death, his emptiness will be gone. Joe listens to him with great interest. That's when Drew comes there and tries to convince Phil for the same deal. But Phil clearly tells him that Phil, not let anyone use his company to earn more money. Now after Drew's departure, Joe asks Phil why he is so entangled in business in the last few days of his life. On this, Phil says to him in anger that this is not just a company, but his lifelong work. And his work is his identity in the world. That's why he wants to leave his job exactly as he did after all his hard work. After this, Quince comes to Phil and says that he is with him in every decision he makes, but he says that he also has some better ideas about the merger of the company. So can he show them to him next week? Hearing this, Phil says that now it's all on Joe. Phil said this because Joe, the angel of death, might take him with him next week. But Quince thinks he will ask Joe and tell him. He goes to Drew and tells him exactly the same, but he didn't know that Drew could use this little information he gave him as a weapon against Phil. Now during dinner at night, Phil stands up to say some loving words for his family. But he can't say much because death was right in front of him. Still, he wanted to spend as much time as possible with his two daughters, out of this little time left. That's why he says that he wants to have dinner with them again tomorrow. Hearing this, both his daughters are very happy because he was such a busy man that having dinner with him was a big deal for them. Now after dinner, Suzanne asks Joe who he is and what he is doing here with his father. But when he can't give any answer to these things, she says that if he doesn't want to say anything about himself for any special reason, then don't tell her. But still she loves him. Now the next day, Drew calls a secret meeting of the board members of the company, including Quince, and tries to incite them against Phil. He turns the same information given by Quince into a weapon against Phil, and says that Phil is taking such reverse decisions on Joe's behalf that are not in the company's favor. Then he says that all of them are also a part of this company. So if they all become one, Phil himself won't be able to stop him from doing this deal. Here at night, during dinner at Phil's house, his daughter Allison brings a lot of cakes and asks Phil to test them so that he can keep his favorite cake for his birthday party, which was supposed to happen only after 2 to 3 days from today. But Phil didn't even know if he would stay alive till his birthday party or not, so he says that he doesn't like this cake and party. Phil's heart breaks with this insolence, and she can't stop her tears even if she wants to. Seeing this, Phil regrets his words a lot. To keep his daughter's heart, he eats this cake and shows it as if he hasn't eaten such a tasty cake for the first time in his life. After dinner, Suzanne starts taking Joe to her father's library. While roaming here, Joe tells her that he likes her scent a lot. Hearing this, Suzanne can't stop herself and kisses her. Joe likes this feeling and thanks her for it. After this, Suzanne leaves from there, but Phil sees them talking and he feels very bad about it. The next day, Phil arrives at his company's office with Joe. There's a board meeting going on, about which he is not given any information. In the meeting, Drew is trying to move the same deal forward that Phil had rejected earlier. Seeing this, he gets angry and says that he will not do this deal and no one will talk about it now. Drew says that, okay, but all the board members have the full right to know who is this Joe Black with him, on whose behalf he is taking all the decisions of the company. Phil becomes silent on Drew's question, and to take advantage of his silence, Drew gets all the board members to vote for him to remove him from the chair of the company. In this, Quince and only 2 boards go in favor of Phil, and now he is left as an ordinary board member instead of the chairman of the company. Seeing all this, Joe feels very bad, and before leaving, he tells Drew that everyone will know what relationship he has with Phil when the time comes. Now after the meeting, Quince tells Drew in anger that he didn't tell him about Phil so that he can remove him from the chairman's chair. Drew starts laughing at this. He thinks that Quince is just pretending to be sad because he was the one who brought that information against Phil, from which his chairman's chair went. He considers Quincy as his own man and tells him a secret that Bontek actually wants to sell Phil's company instead of mixing it with his company. And in this work, he has been helping Bontek from the beginning. Hearing this, Quince says that he will tell everyone that he is involved with Bontek. But Drew is not afraid of his threat and says that by doing this, he falls in the eyes of Phil and his wife Allison. Here at home, Suzanne meets Joe, and today she loves him for a long time. When they start kissing each other, Phil sees them together. After this, when Joe comes to Phil, he tells him to stay away from his daughter in anger and reminds him that his deal was only with her. That's why he is breaking the rules by including his daughter in it. Seeing Phil's anger, Joe threatens him and tells him to think before he speaks, because he knows very well who he is talking to. Saying this, he goes to Suzanne's hospital to meet her, but he finds out that she did not come to the hospital today. On the other hand, at home, Phil tries to explain to Suzanne that Joe is not right for her. When Suzanne asks him the reason for this, he cannot give a special answer, but he says that Joe is going to go very far from here soon. Now at night, Joe tells Phil that he will take him from here after the party tomorrow, on which Phil says that he is ready. Now on the morning of Phil's birthday party, Joe meets Quince, who has been drinking a lot. The two of them start talking, and then Quince suddenly starts crying and says that he told Drew everything about Phil because of which he was removed from his chairman's chair. Hearing this, Joe tells Phil everything and asks for forgiveness, and assures him that he will forgive him. Upon Joe's words, Quince gets courage and goes to Phil and tells him the whole truth. Phil forgives him, but he tells him that he wants to meet Drew and talk to her right now. Hearing this, Quince says to bring Drew and leaves from there. Here at the party, Suzanne meets Joe and says that she knows that he's going to leave her and go far away. Joe says that he also does not want to leave her, but even if he does not want to, he will have to go from there. Then he tells her that she does not know anything about him, but Suzanne says that whatever he is, she just wants to stay with him. She does not want to know anything more than this. Hearing this, Joe hugs her, and now he gets into some thinking. After this, he goes to Phil and tells him that he loves Suzanne, and tonight he will take her with him because she also loves him and wants to go with him. Hearing this, Phil gets very upset because his whole life was in front of Suzanne. But even after arguing for a long time, Joe continues to fight his stubbornness. Then Phil asks him that does Suzanne love him even though she knows his reality? And does he even know where he is taking her? On this point, Joe remains silent. Then Phil tries to explain to him with love that there should be honesty and trust in true love. That's why he requests Suzanne to tell his reality with full honesty. Joe agrees to his request, and once again, he meets Suzanne at the party. He kisses her hand and says that he wants to tell her something. But when he remains silent for a while, Suzanne reminds him of what she said to him in the coffee shop in the first meeting, that he will be ready to change his job and his city for her. In addition, she tells him many more things and says that he fell in love with her in the first meeting of the coffee shop. Hearing this, Joe now understands that she does not love him, but loves the person he met in the coffee shop. Now he hugs her and makes her feel something that makes her shiver, but she tries to ignore this feeling because she fell in love with Joe, and she says that no, she is the one she loves. But Joe had decided that he would sacrifice his love for Suzanne's happiness. That's why he hugs her for the last time and makes a promise that he will always have what he got in the coffee shop. Saying this, he leaves her and goes away from there, and goes to Phil and tells him to be ready after the party. But now he also tells him that now only the two of them, Phil, go from here and no one else. On this, Phil thanks him, and only then Quince comes there and says that Drew's helicopter will reach here in 2 minutes. Hearing this, Phil calls the same trustworthy board member of his company who had voted in his favor alone. He tells him to take all the board members with him and stay on the line, and turns on the phone on speaker mode and leaves. As soon as Drew comes, he starts saying good and bad things to him and starts accusing him of being involved with Montague. He thinks that Drew himself will tell everything in anger, but he was also not a bad player. That's why he only talks about what he said against Phil in the board meeting. Now, seeing that Phil's plan fails, Joe comes forward and tells Drew that today he will tell him his reality, that who he is and what is his relationship with Phil. Phil forbids him to do this. But Joe says that he is an agent of IRS who was collecting evidence of tax theft against Montague. And hiding his identity, Phil was helping him in this. But he says that during this investigation, he got very solid evidence that Drew is trying to destroy the company of Phil together with Montague. Joe gets scared after hearing this and understands that his game is over now. He says this and starts going from there that he has to talk to his lawyer. But then Phil stops him and says that if he wants to escape from jail, then he has to confess all his crimes in front of all the board members, and he has to submit his resignation. Drew agrees to Phil's offer and says that he will reach the company and do all this work. But then on Phil's phone, all the board members who are listening to him say that there is no need to come there. His resignation has been accepted right now. Now they all vote on the phone and cancel the deal with Montague. And in this way, Phil gets his chairman's position back. After this, he smiles at Joe for the first time, and now he goes to spend all his remaining time with his daughters at the party. Here first he cuts his birthday cake and gives a small speech. After this, he hugs his elder daughter Allison and then tries to dance with his younger daughter Suzanne and make her happy. But from inside, Suzanne's heart is crying because her love was going away from her. On the other side, Joe is shown who is standing in the garden and is looking at Suzanne from a distance. He has tears in his eyes, and the sadness of leaving Suzanne is clearly visible on his face. In a little while there is a fire, which means that the party is now over. Now Phil comes to the garden and Joe congratulates him on his birthday. Phil thanks him and says that he is ready to go. Joe remains silent and Phil asks him that it is very difficult to go, isn't it? On which Joe says yes. Phil says that this is life. What more can be said about life? After this, the two go away from the party towards the deep valleys. Seeing them, Suzanne comes running, but they both get lost somewhere in those valleys. She starts running towards those valleys, but then she is surprised to see Joe coming back alone. She asks him where he had gone. Surprised at this question, he looks around. He says that he does not remember anything, that how did he come here? All he remembers is that they met in a coffee shop and he gave his heart to her in the first meeting. After that, he does not remember anything. Suzanne is surprised to hear this. But gradually she understands that the one who had been living in their house for so many days was dead. Who has taken her father? And now she is talking to the person who met her in the coffee shop, and the one she fell in love with in the first meeting. Now she says to him that I wish she could meet her father. Saying this, her eyes are filled with tears. After which the person takes her hand in his hand with a lovely smile. In this way, the two put their hands in their hands and go to the party, and this movie ends